Greetings everybody and welcome to G4G on YouTube. Today we have a special Halloween edition that we're going to take a look at over here. So, if you've been a fan of the channel for a while, you will know that a while back I used to do character death battles. And that was taking a character from Marvel Avengers Alliance and comparing them to their representation in things like Future Fight and Strike Force, a little bit Contest of Champions, maybe even some Marvel heroes. And it usually was dictated by when a character would be new in Marvel Strike Force. And I would sort of have that battle go on and we would decide where the character was represented the best or the strongest. Well, it's Halloween. We have some Nightstalkers to talk about. So, be careful out there, everybody, today. Be sure to check your children's Halloween candy for blades, as they might have blades in it. So this is some footage of Marvel Avengers Alliance Redux Beta 2. This is an old version that existed when the production of the beta or Redux was still being done in Flash. And Marvel Strike Force now has a Nightstalkers faction. So we're going to go ahead and compare two Nightstalkers from Redux to Marvel Strike Force. I also wanted to work in the Dark Hunters, as that is also another Halloween themed group. We're going to touch upon them very, very briefly, because it's a very big group in Strike Force. It requires a lot of comparison, and it makes the video excessively long. So Blade was a scrapper in Marvel Avengers Alliance. He showed up decently far into the game, and he had a pretty strong showing in PvP when he released, especially... And this is a big especially when he got the ISO that allowed him to get the quickening in the first round of combat, and more on that in a little bit. So being a scrapper, he at level 15 could activate his scrapper bonus and of course take the two shots. He had Bleeding Edge, Dead by Dawn, High Stakes, and Bloodlust. He had a passive of Danger Sense, where he had a chance to dodge attacks from those who are bleeding. He was a Daywalker, immune to mind control and disoriented, so pretty positive benefits against some of the worthy. Vampire Hunter, successful attacks against vampires have a chance to stun, chance to assist when an ally is attacks or is attacked. Not many vampires other than Morbius and Spitfire. So not the strongest. You probably were not going to see Morbius in PvP very much. However, Spitfire counts. Back over here, let's talk about his abilities. His level 1 causes bleeding times 3 or internal bleeding times 3. More on that down below. Dead by Dawn, drain life. Attacking bleeding targets restores health. Immortal Blood. This is where he typically would gain his quickening stacks by using his level 2. High Stakes, which was a ranged attack where we threw a stake across the field. It was Hallowed. It was a hemorrhaging attack and it was stealthy. It caused incapacitation and fatal blow. And then one of the strongest things in his kit was Bloodlust, where it was a quick action, but requires quickening to unlock. So you would have had to use Dead by Dawn first, and then get to Bloodlust. And then it also gave him Burst of Speed, where he took 2 actions. It removed his debuffs, and it caused Vampiric Thirst, where everything that drained life for him now also restores stamina. The big thing for him, the thing that made him huge in PvP, to the point where he was everywhere, and Playdom had to step in and nerf it, similar to when they had to step in and nerf Triple Blaster Blow Up. If you're not familiar with Triple Blaster Blow Up, hitting on that really quick, That is when people would stack their defensive team with all blasters. They would use the ISO that says when the blaster is killed, they blow up for X amount of damage, which doesn't sound bad until you realize most people ran a despair item at that point in time. So they would put out despair. All 3 blasters would blow up when killed. You would not be able to heal the damage. All 6 characters would die, resulting in a draw. And when you're on defense, a draw is a hell of a lot better than a loss. So Playdom had to fix that, where the blow up, instead of doing 33% damage, thereby basically killing you 1, 2, 3, roughly 100%, it dropped it down to 30, so that if all 3 blasters blew up, even if you didn't heal, somebody on your team was going to live. So they were 2 big nerfs. Playdom had to jump in there and kind of stop a problem. And he also had the Lambent A ISO 8, which gave him Lambent on his level 1, which allowed him to basically have it be a magic attack, where it was magic and ethereal, and it also switched him over to internal bleeding, which you know is irremovable. So, Blade was pretty strong. He was often teamed up with Spitfire, especially when he was going through his power phase. So there's his model in game, very much like the movie, similar to the Wesley Snipes representation, except for the Widow's Peak has got like a little bit of a slash in the middle of it. He's holding the sword and a stake, and he's got stakes on his leg. Now, comparing him to where he is in Marvel Strike Force, again, very Wesley Snipes representation of it. Got the shades, this harsh Widow's Peak over there. In Marvel Strike Force, they go with the sword, but instead of a stake, they go with his glaive. And I'm sure everybody remembers the famous sequence where he throws the glaive up a ramp that is... He's going up, but the ramp goes down. He throws it up, and he jumps up to the higher level and catches it. So, in comparing looks between the two, before we get into the abilities, compare the Strike Force representation of him to the Marvel Avengers Alliance representation of him. Obviously, it is a different level of graphics. I say they are very, very similar. I mean, pretty much every representation of Blade, other than some of the uniforms of Marvel Future Fight, it's going to look like the Wesley Snipes movie character. I think I like the cloak a little bit more on the Marvel Avengers Alliance version. It sort of has that very Neo in the Matrix trench coat mob kind of style to it, whereas the Strike Force one maybe seems a little bit more functional, allowing the arms to have some free movement. But I'm actually not that crazy about the red up in the lapel and collar there. So I think, all things being equal in terms of graphic level, I would give the visual appearance over to Marvel Avengers Alliance. For the head, I actually like the head more in Marvel Strike Force rather than Marvel Avengers Alliance. I like the solid, sharp Widow's Peak there rather than this little cutout that they've got. So now let's actually take a look at the abilities. He has Silver Slash, which is a standard attack, but adds piercing. It ignores defense up and is unavoidable and cannot be blocked, so that is really, really strong against somebody like Spider Weaver. It reduces the speed bar. It can be repeated, and then if you awaken it, it does extra crit damage. So I would say it's very similar to his level 1 in Marvel Avengers Alliance, except for the fact that it's not causing bleeds. The piercing is actually oddly reminiscent of getting the Lambent Edge ISO 8 over here. It makes it super, super similar to taking Bleeding Edge and making it ethereal and magic over in Marvel Avengers Alliance. Here he has a glaive volley, which you could say is similar to high stakes where he's throwing a glaive instead of a stake. Attacking primary and splashing over to adjacent targets, it clears speed up and applies slow. Piercing, clearing speed up, applying slow again to another slow to the primary target, clearing speed up, applying the slow, and clearing all negative effects from self and one negative effect from all allies once you get it into the awakened area. So this is really, really strong, and this one has a little bit of defensive characteristics on it, where it is clearing debuffs. He has Dampier's Fury in this one, where he attacks the primary target for piercing, reducing speed bars again, clears immunity, which is really, really strong, and then applies Disrupted. If you're not familiar with how Strikeforce does it, immunity is basically the Mystic Shroud of Marvel Strikeforce, and if you clear it and then apply Disrupted, it means you cannot regain the immunity until the Disrupted goes away. So this is basically like using the cube to clear the Mystic and then applying Buff Blocker. That's what Disrupted is. It's Buff Blocker. Reducing the speed bar again, clearing immunity on the primary and second targets, applying a 2-turn Disrupted instead of a 1-turn one, and applying Heal Block. And then he has a passive where characters killed by Blade can't be revived. So that's kind of that's basically Despair on crack. You get the Heal Block, which is like Despair, and then you get the fact that they cannot be revived, which is definitely big. That goes against a lot of strong characters right now in Strikeforce. At the end of every turn, 50% chance to flip slow and offense down on 2 random Nightstalkers. Drain for himself and Nightstalkers. Always flipping the slow and defense down. Clear defense up and apply defense down on every attack target. And then once awakened on self or ally crit on the following ally turn, gain assist now. So the Nightstalkers in Strikeforce are Agatha, which we did not have, Moon Knight, which we do, and we'll talk about, Man-Thing, and Oath. So Blade is definitely very, very strong in both games. I would say that his power level, I'm going to have to give it to Strikeforce, as he is countering a lot of what is out there right now. If you were to compare Blade's top height, his peak of PvP, when he got the ISO and was really strong, was creating multiple turns in the beginning with the quickening and everything, the fact that he could go into basically Super Saiyan mode without taking that first turn to do it, it's super, super strong. He was in a lot of places in PvP. If you had that ISO, he was very good on defense. It was super tough. I remember several YouTubers covering it and then basically turning right around and saying, yeah, there's a problem with Blade. He's extremely broken on defense. I don't run into Blade in PvP in this game, but if you were to take him out in PvP, especially with several Nightstalkers, he's got a very, very strong kit. So I'd say overall on power level, it's close, but I'm going to have to give it over to Strikeforce. Moving on, let's talk about the second Nightstalker, and that is Moon Knight. Of course, Marvel Avengers Alliance came prior to his series on Disney Plus, and this version came after it. Moon Knight has been in the game for a while for Strikeforce. He's bounced around a little bit, mostly stuck to the Shadowlands team up, but now he's moved over to Nightstalker. He is not a particularly strong character in Strikeforce. So, before we get into the abilities and talk about it, let's look at where he looks better visually. And I would have to say he looks better in Strikeforce. It's mostly this Assassin's Creed cowl and cape that's doing it for me in Strike Force. You got the pouches, which is pretty cool for, of course, random bullshit go. It's a very kind of Batman cloak going on over here with Moon Knight in MAA, but it's the cowl, it's the headpiece that's getting me. I like it much better in Strike Force. It's more Taskmaster-ish. It's a little bit tighter and less involved, whereas over here in MAA, I sort of don't like that lip coming down a little bit. However, considering is the avatar of Khonshu, this actually looks more like Khonshu's head, especially when compared to the representation in the series. So visually, yeah, I probably have to give it to Strike Force. Now, I used him quite a bit in Marvel Heroes. He did have a fun kit. That is a character that I managed to level to 60. And I remember him being kind of fun. His talent trees were fun at the time and everything. And you did really feel like you were playing a sort of identity challenged individual. It really kind of felt like you were playing with somebody that had some mental issues going on over there. So in MAA, he had a passive of the White Knight. Gains retribution when an ally is attacked. Lunar Lunatic. Chance to gain a new personality every round. He changes his class when this happened. The weighting was 25% for Captain America, 35% for Spider-Man, 20% for Khonshu, and 20% for Wolverine. So you had a higher chance to go Infiltrator Spider-Man, backed up by Tactician Cap, and then an even balance of Generalist Khonshu or Scrapper Wolverine. If you remember, there was a covert ops at the time of Moon Knight where the agent built a weapon that had a web shooter, a shield shooter, and had Wolverine's claws on it. I think, if I remember correctly, it was called the Vigilante Toolkit. And it took a... it actually took a nerf. There it is, Vigilante Toolkit. Is this the right one? Yeah. This took a bit of a nerf. It was very, very strong when it first came out, and then got knocked back. I don't quite remember what happened in the patch that took it down a peg. It's been a long time since I've used that toolkit. Looking forward to having a covert ops to build that whenever the Season 2 content comes out for Redux. So, let's take a look at the abilities. So we had the Fist of Khonshu, which did change depending upon what personality he was in. For the most part, it stayed the same except for Captain America gave him targeted and target focus. The other one, Crescent Darts, seems to stay the same, but I'm seeing some changes from Tripwire Tackle depending upon what personality he was in. Yeah, the Spider-Man persona ups his hit and crit rate over there. For Crescent Darts, it does Swift Vengeance, grants an extra turn while affected by Retribution, and it consumes Retribution, so that's a lot of extra turns there if you're building your Retribution right. Impaired and Pain goes out. For Tripwire Tackle, you have Stun and Off Balance. It also does Hard Justice, where it consumes a Retribution. You know, similar to like Hulk Up. Hulk Burning is Hulk Up and everything. And then Blood Moon is a hemorrhaging attack. War on Crime increases at Retribution by 1. Bleeding, Ravaged, and he does have several ISOs. He has an E-ISO. Gains 1 Retribution when anyone attacks with exception to Crescent Darts. And then he had a ISO for Bloody Knuckles, where he exploits bleeds. And then Circumscribed, where it adds Far Side and now applies Flank. That is huge. That's really big right there. That's a very Gambit level a ISO there where he had the quick action could apply flanked. So all in all, a pretty good kit. However, you know, you never knew which personality you were getting. It was random. You might turn into an infiltrator while fighting a lot of scrappers, and then you would be in trouble at that point. So visually, I got to give it to Strike Force. Let's look at the abilities. So you have Lunar Strike. 50% chance to gain a random positive effect from 2 turns on the list. Counter, offense up, and speed. All of those are pretty good. When forced to attack an ally, this character deals less damage to Shadowland and Nightstalker characters. So if he gets mind controlled, like by Emma, he does less damage to his team than a standard person. Damage goes up. He applies 2 positive effects from the list. And at the orange level, he will always apply 2 effects from the list. Counter and offense up and speed up, these are all very, very strong, especially in PvP. He has Night Guardian, where he attacks the primary target for 150% damage. He rebound chains to other targets and does splash. Gain 100% crit chance on any target that has a negative effect. Can't be blocked. Can't be counterattacked. That's interesting. In raids, this attack cannot be counterattacked, but then a counterattack breaks the chain. So he seems to be a little bit of a raid-focused character. And then he ups the damage of his attacks and how many people he actually hits. He has Death from Above, which is kind of like the tripwire tackle in execution, except this is basically a jumping random bullshit go. Heal block, 50% chance to apply 3 additional negative effects such as bleed, blind, defense down, disrupted, offense down, slow. Disrupted and slow are really, really big. Blind means they're going to miss the next attack, so it's not a bad list on that. Here he has some synergy with Nightstalkers. Damage to all enemies. More of a chance of applying the random effects. And then 80 to 100% damage to all enemies. Apply negative effects for 2 turns. If this character has 3 or more Nightstalker allies, clear all positives. That's really big. Clearing all positive effects has become pretty popular in Strike Force, but to retroactively add it to such a old character as an update to them, that's really good. And then he has a passive that they're calling the Fist of Khonshu, which is weird. It's a passive here, but it's an active ability in MAA. He gains damage reduction, resistance, but oddly, this is only dealing with Shadowlands. I feel they did not update this properly to Nightstalker. So, combat-wise, again, pretty tough, but what he does in Strike Force against other people is stronger than what he does against other people in MAA. So I would have to lean towards Strike Force for the power battle. So for Moon Knight, visually, I think he wins in Strike Force. And combat capabilities, I think he wins over in Strike Force as well. If there was a way of controlling the personality that you could do within MAA, similar to how Venom was, where Agent Venom would start as an infiltrator, go out of control, turn into Venom, and be a bruiser. If there was a way of controlling Moon Knight's phases, so to speak, I think he might be stronger in MAA, and maybe the team will eventually create an ISO that allows you to do that if they think that is thematically correct. But yeah, I gotta say, he is stronger in Strike Force, whereas Blade was close, and he got edged out just a little bit. I think clearly, far and away, he is stronger in Strike Force. Clearing positive effects, applying heal block, those are all really, really solid. So that would be like despair over in Marvel Avengers Alliance, or something like Blackest Void removing buffs and everything. That could be potentially like an E-ISO the team could do. They could give Moon Knight an E-ISO that says his attacks have a random chance to remove a buff. Anything from the non-bordered buff category there, the ones that actually can be removed by, standard buff removal. That could be a good way of bringing Moon Knight into a similar power level. And having a random chance means it's a little bit fair. If every one of his attacks removed a buff, it might be too strong. But if there was like a 50, 60, 70% chance to remove a buff on his attacks, could be fun. So there you go, guys. There is the Halloween death battle between two Nightstalkers, Blade and Moon Knight. I would entertain some conversation that Blade was stronger in Marvel Avengers Alliance than he is in Strike Force. I think that one is close enough that I could be potentially swayed. I think Moon Knight, yeah, the Strike Force version of him definitely takes the cake. And the other squad that is in MSF that I think deserves a shout out on Halloween are the Dark Hunters, but it would be way too long to talk about these guys. It's Morbius, Ghost Rider, Elsa, Mordo, and Dr. Voodoo. These guys all have representation in Marvel Avengers Alliance, so you can kind of do your own comparison there. The one thing that I will say is that visually speaking, I like Dr. Voodoo way better in Marvel Avengers Alliance. The MSF representation kind of reminds me of somebody that, like, Keanu Reeves would go into their shop to ask him some questions in Constantine, and he'd have sort of like a Cajun voodoo knick-knack shop as like a front, whereas the Marvel Avengers Alliance representation seems like a real honest-to-goodness practicing voodoo witch doctor. He just seems... the intimidation factor is there more in the Marvel Avengers Alliance version. And they are relatively similar in what they do. They lean into the Staff of Legba and the fact that it heals a little bit. Of course, the MAA version is capable of going phased. He's got a mind control. He grants extra turns. Pair that up with somebody like Cable or the Quantum Jumper with the Agent, and you've got a really, really strong character. So that is something that I wanted to point out, that I like the Dr. Voodoo version in MAA better than the MSF version. And then a lot of the rest of them are fairly similar, and Elsa is visually almost identical in both games, other than the fact that it looks like she kind of has a bouffant in Marvel Avengers Alliance. So, happy Halloween, everybody. Stay safe. Glad we could have this little discussion together. And remember, check your kids' Halloween candy and make sure there are no blades. Have a good one, everybody.